alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about in the wake of the Russian-Ukraine tensions that are developing, what kind of a world order can we see now? Are we going to experience something new as far as the US-India tensions over the same issue are concerned? We'll also be talking about the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, which is very relevant now. That may come into play. Of course, the decision eventually rides with the President of United States, and the fact that, of course, there's as far as exports are concerned, military exports from Russia alone in India are about 49% in 2020. In the wake of that kind of a developing situation, what can we expect as far as India is concerned? The narrative that they've been trying to put forward, whether this is a considerable dent in that narrative as far as the world is concerned. All of that today on Perspective. I have with me Lieutenant General Raza Khan, who's a security analyst. Thank you for joining us today. Also Shahid Amin, who's a former ambassador. Thank you for joining us. General Raza, let me start off with you. As far as the situation overall is concerned, certainly in the wake of the developing situation with regard to Ukraine and Russia and their tensions, we are seeing newer developments. As far as India particularly is concerned, how do you see the situation develop as far as India is concerned, as far as their narrative is concerned, that they try to sell out in the world, and now I think the world is seeing the opposite of that quite clearly.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Can you hear me?
Gigi.
Okay. Obviously, India is unexpectedly rather quiet, at the United Nations, whether it is at the Security Council, the General Assembly, or otherwise, the Indian government for obvious reasons. And one of the reasons is that it is dependent on Russia, to the extent that bulk of its defense purchases have been coming from Russia for the last many decades. And this includes, their major weapons and equipment, which includes aircrafts, which includes aircraft carriers, submarines, missiles, air defense systems, and their continuous spares and upgradation for a very long time. So that is actually one main reason. The other main reason is the perpetual and continuous support that previously the Soviet Union and thereafter Russia has been providing to India in the diplomatic arena. Again, anywhere in the world where Indian interests were concerned, I think they were supported by Moscow at the UN or elsewhere. So India is quiet because of that. But as you mentioned, in your introduction, the current acquisitions by India, essentially, which relates to the deployment of the S-400 missile systems, of which India has only received, the first installment or the first shipment. So while the United States has applied the CATSA sanctions against China and Turkey for such purchases, it was again reciprocally quite in the case of India. But I think they probably will now be reconsidering their positions on this.
But will they be reconsidering their position? Let me come back to you. I'm going to go to Shahid Amin. Shahid Sahab, we also saw the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Mr. Lu say that all of us have been working to urge India to take a clear position as a position opposed to Russia's actions. He said the State Department continues to engage India closely to underscore the importance of a collective response and condemning Russia's invasion. when there's clearly this kind of move towards getting India to take a clear stance as far as this Russian Ukraine issue is concerned, we don't see that happening. And in that kind of a scenario, what do you expect between Russia and US? Do you think that, one, India will take a clear position? Can they do so? Can they afford to do so, considering their relationship with Russia? And if they do so, what do they face then?
Well, India is obviously caught in a dilemma, which is also perhaps in the case of Pakistan.
Right.
India, as you know, in the last decade or so, has developed a very close strategic relationship with USA. And in fact, the general wisdom has been that it has become a strategic partner of USA, basically in the context of China. And that relationship has prospered in so many ways. Close collaboration has been there. At the same time, Russia and the former Soviet Union have been close allies of India since the 1950s. I was ambassador in Moscow in the 80s, and there was a special relationship between India and the Soviet Union in every way, diplomatic, military, economic, you name it. That relationship has diminished, there's no doubt, as the American factor has come into play, but it has not substantially been reduced. As the General Staff was saying, India continues to buy most of its armaments from Russia, including some very latest military equipment. And Russia, as you know, there is an annual summit involving Russia and India. And there are so many areas of collaboration, including Russian commitment to support India's permanent seat in the Security Council. So that remains a very strong relationship, although in comparative terms, it has diminished. So India is caught in this dilemma that if it condemns Russia for what is happening in Ukraine, then Russia will certainly be very, very alienated, or the relationship will suffer a serious setback. On the other hand, the fact is that in the last 10 or 20 years, India has consciously drawn closer to USA in a strategic term. So it has therefore decided to take a neutral position. But even that has exposed India to severe criticism from the USA, because the USA clearly had more expectations from India, and because of its neutral stance, that has been greatly dented. So I think India is going to feel the pressure in the coming days. It is trying to, placate both sides at the same time. There's an old saying that those who try to sit on two stools fall in between. So India is facing that kind of a dilemma. They are trying to
Let
put
me
the
come
best
back to you. I
possible
also have with
construction
us
to it.
Javed Jadoon. I will just come back to you. Javed Sab, I think that Shahid Amin Sab very clearly elucidated. He's saying that it's a case of India trying to do both in terms of trying to keep their relationship with Russia, trying to take a neutral stance. But the point is, can they take a neutral stance on this issue when they've clearly aligned themselves quite closely with the US, one, and then they continue to have this relationship with Russia also. They've managed to sort of pull through, before, but in the kind of scenario that's developing now, with the Senate also, urging, saying that they're urging India to take a stance. What does this mean for the future of the US and Indian relations particularly? Because we've seen, there is a long-standing relationship. There's also lately been a lot of support. There's also, rather like a block developing for a time now as far as US and India are concerned.
Thank you very much, Marukh. I think India finds itself in probably the most difficult situation in the region, because India is very closely aligned with Russia, and they have concluded a number of arms agreements with the Western world, including America and France as well. I think it is the kind of hypocrisy, I would say, which India is showing right now, because Russia is its old ally. It used to be a very trusted friend and the main supplier of weapon systems to India, including the fighter planes, as was mentioned. Most importantly, the recent the deal concluded between New Delhi and Moscow about the supply of S-400 state-of-the-art anti-aircraft system. And now the problem with New Delhi is they are trying to board the two boats at the same time. They really can't remain neutral or non-reliant in this particular juncture because America has drawn the lines very clearly. Americans believe that it is about time that countries should come forward and support the American stance as far as Russian invasion of Ukraine is concerned. But Pakistan definitely didn't have the kind of relations which India had with the USSR, with Russia, and previously with the USSR as well. So I think India in the region, in this particular region in South Asia, finds itself in a very precarious situation. And its dichotomy and the paradoxes have come on the open because New Delhi really doesn't want to be seen to be siding with Russia, knowing that it will have repercussions and consequences for New Delhi vis-a-vis its relations with America and the other NATO allies. And on the other hand, they do not want to be seen to be siding with the United States of America, given the kind of military ties they have with Moscow. So I think.
But do you see them
American
choosing a side at this time? Let me come back to you, General Saab. Do you think that do you see them choosing a side at this time? Because of course we hear about how there is a lot of engagement between Washington and Delhi on trying to get Delhi to commit one way or the, one way, of course, as far as the US is concerned. But do you think that there will, India will walk the talk, which they've, said in the past? Or do you think, of course, at this time they're trying to hedge both bets as far as, US and Russia are concerned?
I think the US's message to India was communicated at two levels. The first level was at the level of the foreign secretaries, and thereafter, I think the US lawmakers, some of them who were, very supportive of the Indian position in the White House and elsewhere. So they have said that the lawmakers called on India to distance itself from Russia, and some of them said that they were actually disappointed at the present Indian position. However, when you see the position of the White House, I think that has been rather ambiguous, and one will have to see how they react to this, because to them, India is again important, for the containment of China. Similarly, Russia is also dependent on Indian money once they sell their weapons and equipment to India. So you cannot say for certain at the moment what is the likely scenario going to be. I think, but it is
We
going
even
to be.
have, let me come back to you, we even have former Indian Navy Chief of Staff, Admiral Arun Prakash saying that harsh sanctions on Russia could eventually result in Indian military being virtually disarmed due to equipment and spare shortages. So we see that, you are, exactly what you are saying, that the correlation between the kind of relationship that Russia and India have at this time and, their economic dependency on each other, which is clearly there as far as the military in particular is concerned. Shayad Amin Saab, overall, so it's not only whether India will choose, whether India will choose to take a side or not. It's the fact that whether they can afford to, considering their own military's position and the fact that they are dependent on Russia and vice versa, right?
Not dependent. Certainly, they think Russia is a very important friend. I think if one were to make a kind of a rough estimate, I would say for India in percentage terms, USA is 60% important, Russia is about 40% important. Okay. At this time. I'm just making a rough kind of estimate. The balance is in favor of USA, and I think the future probably will see India-US relationship growing stronger and stronger because the USA certainly sees China as the new superpower and with which the United States will have a long-term difficult relationship in which India will be the strategic partner. At least the US visualize India to be a strategic partner. So I think India is facing a dilemma, and these very severe sanctions which have been placed on Russia, as the Indian naval chief pointed out, is probably going to impede Russia from meeting its military commitments towards India, because as far as I can understand, these sanctions are far-ranging, and they may affect the military relationship, or at least military supplies from Russia to India. So this is the situation. But India, we must not forget, is an important country, and neither USA nor Russia would be willing to just jeopardize their relationship with India. It is going to be a very difficult diplomatic game, but I think it will be premature to say that India will either lean one side or the other, or either the USA or Russia can afford to alienate India. So they will all play a very clever diplomatic game.
But they might play a very, a clever game, and so to speak. But even if they don't take sides, and neutrality, which is what you're saying, they may opt for. Javed Sahab, that itself will be taking a side, picking a side for the US, no?
I think, MARUKH, I don't believe New Delhi is playing a very clever game. I think they are playing a very dumb game, in the sense that America knows the kind of ties it had and it still has with Moscow. And we have seen a statement emanating from Moscow to, I'm saying a little bit softly, that we understand New Delhi's position because of its abstention at the UN General Assembly. But on the contrary, I think a bit strict kind of statement came from the White House, or rather the State Department, about the countries right now not showing willingness to support American sanctions against Russia. We need to understand that the kind of sanctions which have been imposed against Russia are very crippling, very punishing, and in the near future, I don't believe that New Delhi would be able to do any business with the USA. Given the situation, because America has drawn very clear lines, and NATO allies, I believe that this conflict is going to not remain confined to Ukraine, because ultimately, when Americans, they have already started providing weapons, including the Stinger missiles and Javelin anti-tank missiles, and even some of the fighter planes, A-10 ground attack fighter planes. I think Russia does know that. They are not fighting against the Ukrainians. They are fighting against NATO and against America as well. So,
how do you see this in this kind of a scenario where you are saying that there is going to be, definitely a thaw in the relationship between US and India? How do you see the region, particularly Pakistan's relationship with the US also? Considering, of course, that, we have been on, as far as their relationship with India is concerned, in the recent past, it seems to have taken a certain kind of precedence. I don't think it would be wrong to say, as far as America and US are concerned, rather than Pakistan and US. Do you think that there's likely going to be a more warmth between Washington and Islamabad? You think that there's going to be change there also?
MARUKH, I think it depends a lot on the kind of policy the Foreign Office pursues in this regard, because even Pakistan has to maintain a very delicate balance as far as the Ukrainian situation is concerned, because Pakistan never had very deep-rooted relations with Moscow. On the contrary, Pakistan had economic, trade, and defense ties with America, and Pakistan remained the most allied ally of the USA. We have been siding with the USA.
But we are not taking any sides as far as the conflict is concerned.
I think we don't have to take any sides, but ultimately, when the chips are down and when Americans say that, well, you need to take a side, then I think that would be the juncture or the stage where Pakistan would be put in a very difficult scenario. They will have to choose a side. Maybe not right now, but down the road, when this conflict doesn't end and the Russians unable to occupy Ukraine and face a kind of a resistance backed by NATO and America.
What about, Javed Sahab, let me come back to you. General Raza, what about the narrative that India has been giving out to the world, which is also that they are neutral, they are, secular in thought, they are progressive. All of that narrative that they've been trying to sell out in the world, into the world. There's also been, diplomatic efforts to give out that image. That also will take a certain blow, no?
Yes, while they may claim that they're neutral, and in the past they were also the founding, members of the non-aligned movement, but I think they have given up that stance. They are no more neutral now. They are part of the Quad, which and they're clearly, in the U.S. camp. Having said that, this was also pointed out by the Russian foreign minister, when the Pakistani delegation was there in Moscow. In the joint statement, there was a general reference to the Indo-Pacific group, wherein the Russian foreign minister said that the Indo-Pacific group wants to gobble up the whole continent. And that was actually a pointer towards the Indian policies now, which is coming up. At the same time, I think what is happening is that India and also the United States would also be worried about China and Russia getting closer because of the US sanctions and European sanctions on Russia. And if that happens, I think it will be detrimental not only to the Indian interests, but the interests of the United States. Additionally, I think India has many other avenues available, particularly from Israel, from France, and many other countries. And also in the past, if the United States wants to favor some country by passing their own laws, they can do so to third countries like Israel's and other allies, which I think they are going to do in the case of India.
Right. Okay. Ji, Amin Saab, in terms of these new developments that General Saab is talking about, in terms of China and Russia, do you think that that is probably something that we can expect, like General Saab is saying, China and Russia getting closer, and as a result of that, again, certain changes in what one can call blocks, whether one wants to or not?
Well, I think, firstly, there is no doubt there is a strong relationship between Russia and China, which seems to be growing, and people were talking of kind of a strong alliance vis-a-vis the USA. But I think the Ukraine crisis has dented that kind of warmth to a certain extent. No doubt China has sounded critical of the West and sounds at times to be sympathetic to Russian concerns. But when you look at the real situation, the Chinese stance is more akin to the West than to Russia. China says it respects the territorial integrity of every state. But is Russia showing respect for the territorial integrity of Ukraine? And China says it should be done peacefully. Is Russia doing it peacefully? So, in substance, the stance of China, I'm not saying it is aligned with the West, but it has more in common with the West than with Russia. Secondly, there were expectations, I think, that now that the economic crisis or crunch is there on Russia, and Russia is really facing severe sanctions which are hurting its economy very badly. But there was a hope that China will come to the rescue of Russia, and China, of course, has the capability, it has such resources and whatnot. But again, the latest news suggests that China doesn't seem to be in any hurry to sort of fill in the gap which is coming up in the Russian economy due to the sanctions. So China is being very guarded in a sense. Russia has reason to be disappointed. I think, let us face it, Russia is very isolated. And the sanctions, the severity of the sanctions, probably many people don't realize how far they are going to hurt Russia. It may achieve its maybe some objective in Ukraine, but it will be very much like what we call a Pyrrhic victory. That it sounds like a victory, but in reality it is not. Russia has probably taken more than it can chew, and I think Putin needs to totally reassess what he has been trying to do, what he's going to achieve, and what he's going to lose in the process.
Right, General Saab, according to Shahid Saab, I hope you've been following. He's saying that we haven't seen the kind of response that perhaps China hasn't made as far as India is concerned, as far as Russia is concerned, particularly Russia, in terms of they're being guarded according to the Ambassador Saab. As far as China is concerned, if China continues to remain neutral, China doesn't, make any overture. It doesn't, allow Russia to fall back on that kind of aid or that kind of help from China. Then what are the options as far as Russia is concerned?
I think I don't see that happening. I think China and Russia have now been pushed together by the West and the US towards each other. And I think they are going to cooperate and coordinate. If you recall, even earlier, there were threats to China of being, dissociated from the SWIFT system. Russia has also been removed from the SWIFT system. So both may collectively challenge that by finding out an alternative of their own through trading, through ruble and yuan or other systems. That is, I think, the biggest challenge to both of them. And if that cooperation occurs, which I believe is likely to happen, I think that is going to challenge the United States and the West's domination through the petrodollars. And once that happens, I think it is going to hurt the US and the West's interest more than what you would see them, hurting the Russian interest. So I think these are very big issues, and one will have to see how they actually unfold.
Right, let me come back to you. Javed Saab, do you agree, as far as China and Russia is concerned? Of course, as far as Shahid Saab is concerned, he thinks that China hasn't yet made the kind of, overture or the kind of, statement that one would, expect as far as their relationship with China is concerned. According to General Saab, he thinks that they will likely do so. What's your take on this? You think that they are being pushed together, which is what General Saab is saying, and that they don't have a choice as far as China and Russia are concerned at this time?
No, I think, MARUKH, there have been certain very unexpected things as far as Russia is concerned. They believe that it would be swift. Maybe in a couple of days they would be, will be able to occupy Ukraine, and there won't be any substantial resistance, and they would put in place a puppet regime over there, and it would be the end of the story.
Okay.
But what unexpected has happened, it is the 9th day, and they have not been able to capture any major city except a couple of very smaller cities.
So you're saying this seriously
capital Kyiv, and President Zelensky is in place.
Underestimated the situation?
Underestimated, and because of their losses as well. According to Kremlin, 3 days ago, their tally of troops' death was about 500, while independent sources were confirming that it is somewhere around 1,500, which is, I think, a big loss as far as Russians are concerned, because they are pitted against a very small nation which doesn't have the air defense system, doesn't have the air force. The army is split, but I think the kind of resolve the Ukrainians have shown, it is remarkable. Okay. So I would like to link the response of China as far as the war is concerned. I think even China believed, even Americans believed, even I think the NATO military strategists believed that it would be over in a couple of days. It didn't happen. And now they have started pouring in weapons. Even the volunteers from USA and the European countries, we have seen reports confirmed by the State Department as well that American veterans of different wars, the ex-special forces, they have started arriving there. I think America and the NATO have some very bigger plans. they would like Russia to be bogged down in Ukraine.
Okay.
Their heavy armament is stalled over there. The convoy, which is the military convoy, which is spread over 65 kilometers, has not been able to move since last couple of days. So I think even China now realizes the kind of the second factor was unexpected massive sanctions as far as West is concerned. Russia wasn't prepared for that. I think the ruble, which plummeted about 30%, which is, I think, quite worrying as far as Moscow is concerned.
But
so even China is watching the situation very carefully. Because right now they don't want to be seen to be siding openly with Moscow.
Right.
Despite the fact that they do have sympathies with Moscow, they believe that Moscow's invasion
So they're
is
waiting and
not an
watching.
invasion.
They're saying, you know, what the situation is and how it develops. Let me come back to you. General Saab, do you agree that as far as China is concerned, of course, it's waiting and watching, but also as far as Russia is concerned, there was, they seriously underestimated the situation vis-a-vis what they would encounter as far as Ukraine is concerned. Perhaps underestimated the Ukraine, whatever help they would be getting, the aid they would be getting, the sanctions, overall the scenario. Because of course, like Javed Saab is saying, we are many days into this war, so to speak.
You see, when you come to the Chinese diplomacy, they have a quiet style of diplomacy. They don't talk much about what they're going to do, and probably that is the reason that they have given their policy, which is a very broad policy, and I think it will continue. But they actually believe more in actions rather than in words. And when it comes to that, they have already established, road linkages to Russia in the north. They are already purchasing very large strategic quantities of oil and gas from them. Once, the Russian gas sales to Europe and to the West is reduced, or once they stops, then I think China will gladly purchase, those commodities from them at relatively cheaper prices, as it has been doing in the past, and which, as I said earlier, is going to bring China and Russia much closer. When that symbiosis
Shahid Saab, do you
happens,
agree? You think that
I
eventually
think
it's going to happen as far as Russia and China are concerned? It's only inevitable, which is what General Saab is saying.
Yeah, no doubt. Russia and China have a very strong relationship, and they see themselves as kind of allies
with
against
India
the West.
then?
Against the West. Yeah, but the Ukraine situation has somewhat dented that relationship. I think that is the wrong war at the wrong place from the Chinese point of view. They have not said anything about the Russian position, which is we are there to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, and even these areas which have been declared independent and all that. China has not supported Russia on any specific point of view. So you can see that China is being very cautious. But that does not mean that the strategic relationship which has developed between Russia and China is going to diminish substantially. It is a kind of a fluctuating situation, and I'm sure Chinese will be very happy if somehow the Ukraine crisis is resolved quickly, so that for them this is a distraction, it's a diversion. The strategic relationship between Russia and China will continue, but it has taken a beating because of this unnecessary Ukrainian crisis.
But you see, do you agree that there has been serious miscalculation, perhaps underestimation as far as Russia is concerned vis-a-vis the position, the power that Ukraine has, the resilience that they would have in continuing to fight Russia?
No, I'm not surprised. I know the Ukrainian nationalism has a very long history, and the Ukrainians have put up terrific fight in the past, in the past decades and years also. So there's no doubt that they are capable of putting up a strong resistance, and they are receiving very substantial help from the West in terms of sophisticated arms and even volunteers. And then I think Russia really miscalculated the sanctions.
It would be simplistic to assume that Moscow would not have anticipated that kind of help that at this time Ukraine is getting. That seems to have been an inevitable consequence of the war, right? Once it started.
Yeah, but the degree of assistance is certainly more than probably what they count. In fact, they thought that they will have this situation in control in a matter of maybe a week or something, which has not happened. So there are miscalculations, and certainly they did not realize the severity of the sanctions which have been placed on Russia. This is going to cripple Russia, at least for the time being.
Right, let me come back to you, Javed sir.
I think look at the kind of sanctions they have imposed against Russia. The Russian oligarchs, they're running away, their super yachts are being confiscated in Europe, and the Russian people not being able to deposit or draw money from ATMs, etc. I think this is the kind of response which Moscow never expected. It is a massive, massive response on part of USA, because the problem is the body bags are going to go back to Moscow, not to Washington or the European capitals, because Europeans are basically providing material support to the Ukrainians. Americans are providing the weapons and the financial support, but Russians are fighting, the Ukrainians are fighting.
How
when
relevant
when
do
the
you
body
think?
bags start going back to Russia, I think this war ultimately will become unpopular, and it would put a lot of pressure on Putin to go for some kind of reconciliation or negotiations.
When we talk about, you think that's likely? You think that
Ultimately, I strongly believe
I mean, with the
that
kind of bravado that this has happened as far as Russia is
but the
concerned.
problem with Moscow is right now they will have to go for a face saving as well.
That's what
Being
I'm
the
saying.
alternative superpower militarily and economically as well, the kind of resistance they have faced over there.
How relevant do you think it is, Javed Saab, as far as this countering America's adversaries through Sanctions Act in India is concerned? Do you think that it's likely that Washington will move towards sanctions against India if they don't take a particular stance with regard to this Russian-Ukraine issue, or they're going to allow them to sort of take this neutral path?
MARUKH, I don't believe Washington is going to impose any sanctions against New Delhi, because they would be putting a lot of diplomatic pressure on New Delhi to
Which is
not
what they
side
said.
openly with
Right.
Russia. But I think because of the given sort of relations they have, military relations, economic ties as well, I don't see that happening where Washington would be imposing any sanctions against New Delhi. But I think ultimately they
But
will
it is
have
going to lead to some sort of, maybe a fraught relationship between India and
Absolutely.
Russia.
I think
Certainly
the
a
warnings have started coming out of Washington as far as New Delhi is concerned, because they strongly believe that New Delhi should have taken a very clear stance as far as the invasion is
And they
concerned.
expected India
they
to
shouldn't
take
have they abstained from there, and that really angered Washington, because they always believe that now New Delhi has broken away from Moscow and the kind of alliance they have. They expected New Delhi to come forward openly and should have supported the resolution condemning Russian invasion of Ukraine. But I think that has not happened, and now I think ultimately a lot of pressure would be coming the way of New Delhi, and Narendra Modi, I think, wouldn't be in a very comfortable situation right now.
Because we see at this time, as far as the state, the state of minorities in India is concerned, we see what's happening in Kashmir as far as India is concerned. For the US, perhaps it'll be a tad more difficult to close its eyes to all those realities now, do you think?
MARUKH, before I come to this particular point you mentioned, I would like to say that now the new world order is being drawn, and I think every country, including all the South Asian nations, will have to take a position, because this is not going to end there right now. Because if Russia stays over there, the conflict is going to be expanded, and many other European countries could feel threatened as far as Russian heavy military presence in Ukraine is concerned. So I think even Pakistan, a country like Pakistan, will have to take a kind of a position vis-a-vis this conflict, and the division lines being drawn between Moscow and on the one hand, and American-led alliance as well.
You think it makes it easier for Washington to see what's happening, the real India, the reality in India at this time?
I think they have started realizing the kind of ally New Delhi is, because as I mentioned at the outset, that the American expected very open support of the resolution at the UN General Assembly. That didn't happen. And I think now Americans have started realizing that India really can't be trusted. India has the kind of relations with Moscow, which I think are very deep-rooted, historically speaking. particularly the defense ties between New Delhi and Moscow. And New Delhi wouldn't like to jeopardize their ties with Moscow and wouldn't like to sacrifice their relations with Moscow. And this particular point has been realized by policymakers in
Right,
Washington.
unfortunately, I'm running out of time. General Saab, your quick comments vis-a-vis India and the fact that perhaps this situation will allow Washington to see India for the kind of ally it's proven to be.
Well, let me very quickly say, what has already been said, that what Russia is doing in Ukraine, is a very gradual, phased operation. It has not unfolded all its options over there. It has gone only now, let's say, for the nuclear facilities and the key areas, keeping, the negotiations still open. Secondly, that, it is going to very shortly hurt Europe more than Russia itself. Thirdly, that the Russian pain threshold is much higher than the West, and body bags, I think, are not going to affect them as much as it affected the Western forces in Afghanistan. Finally, when it comes to, I think, U.S.-India relationship, I don't see much of change in that, as I said earlier. And when it comes to the issue of Kashmir or to the treatment of minorities, again, I think because of what has happened in Ukraine, I think they are now distracted and they're going to pay more attention to that rather than
Right,
what India is
right.
doing.
Unfortunately, I'm running out of time. Shahid Amin Saab, overall, your quick comments before we close.
Well, I would say USA probably will not be imposing any kind of sanctions on India. It is certainly very disappointed with India with what has happened in the context of Ukraine and is applying the maximum diplomatic pressure, but not beyond that. US will remain keen to have a strategic relationship with India. For the rest, I would say only confine myself to saying that the economic and other sanctions which have been placed on Russia are far more than what Russia had anticipated, and they are crippling Russia. They are having a very big effect on Russia, whereas on the contrary, Europe is suffering also because of the stoppage of gas and oil and other operations with Russia, but much less than Russia is suffering. So on the whole, Russia,
Right.
in my view, will
Unfortunately,
be
that's
have
all the
no
time that
option
we
but
have. Thank you so much for being with us, Javed Jadoon Saab, Lieutenant General Raza Khan. Thank you for joining us. Shahid Amin, thank you so much for being with us. As far as the Russia-Ukraine crisis is concerned, certainly it's going to, the way it unfolds in the future will of course show clearly which country is at. But as far as the US seeing India for the kind of ally it's proven to be, that's certainly something that US will now have to deal with, will have to decide. As far as whether, as far as India is concerned, of course, they're walking a very tight rope as far as this Russia-Ukraine crisis and their stance on it is, and their relationship with US is. But it may, and one hopes that that's true, allow America, Washington to see the real India, the real face of India, and what's happening in India as far as the minorities are concerned, as far as Kashmir is concerned, as far as selling a false narrative to the world is concerned. Of course, one hopes that the Russian-Ukraine crisis can be solved, and of course, the loss of lives that are happening at this time can be avoided. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.